In 1960, Life magazine actually published this photo showing the outline of a huge ship in a mountain range about 20 miles south of Mount Ararat. Now, there was an expedition sent there at the time, but they didn't actually find anything very promising. The first person to really take the Noah's Ark site seriously was actually Ronald E. Wyatt, commonly known as Ron Wyatt, of Nashville, Tennessee, and he did a 10-year period of research on the site. Now, nearby the site is the village of Kazan, which is Turkish for the place of 8. Of course, there were 8 people on the Ark, and very commonly places are called after events that happened. Now, of course, there were 8 survivors of the flood, and then maybe that's why the village of Kazan is called the place of 8. Now, the Noah's Ark didn't have to go anywhere. It actually had to survive a worldwide flood, which lasted for over a year. And of course, it was very choppy water, or may have been very choppy water, and there were stabilizing stones, which are called drogue stones, to stabilize the vessel. And those drogue stones are found very near the Noah's Ark site. And there's Ron Wyatt with an enormous anchor stone found close to the Noah's Ark site. And I want you to see right in the center of that is a great big cross. Now, that wasn't there originally. What happened is during the maybe medieval times, or perhaps the Crusader times, Christians went up there because they believed this was a holy site, and it is a holy site. And they marked these drogue stones. There you see very clearly from a photograph of Henry Nissen, who's written that excellent book, with an anchor stone with Armenian crosses engraved on the stone. That's his book, which I mentioned before. At the top of each anchor stone is a hole for the rope, and there you can see a lot more crosses on the drogue stone. Now, in 1978, there was an earthquake which actually removed a lot of the earth surrounding the Ark, which actually made it much easier for Ron Wyatt to investigate Noah's Ark. And there you can see the rib timbers along the side of the vessel. There you can see some deck timbers poking through there. And it was much easier because of the earthquake for Ron Wyatt to actually take measurements and samples. And there's Ron Wyatt pointing to a deck beam sticking out from the side of Noah's Ark. And it says in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 6, the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. Now, we know the first 5 books of the Bible were all written by Moses. It says so in John chapter 1. Now, of course, Moses was brought up in the courts of Pharaoh. So he would have been familiar with the Royal Egyptian cubit. And if you go to the British Museum, you can see a Royal Egyptian cubit. And a Royal Egyptian cubit, 1 cubit, is 20.62 inches. And 300 Egyptian cubits is 515.5 feet. And that's exactly what the dimensions of the Ark are. 300 cubits is 6,186 inches, which is 515.5 feet, which is exactly the dimensions of the Ark, which makes it a very large vessel. Some of you have seen the movie, The Titanic. Well, it's about 3/4 the size of the Titanic, a large, large vessel. A very large vessel, 300 cubits long, just nearby on the mountain range of mountains of Ararat. It's exactly 300 cubits long. Now, of course, it's splayed out a bit, and you'd expect that of a vessel 4,400 years old. Now, the vessel actually has a lot of rivets. And it says in Genesis chapter 4, metal rivets, that Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Now, Ron Wyatt used metal detectors to show that the formation contained a regular pattern of iron. And there's actually Ron Wyatt, not just with metal detectors, but with subsurface or subground radar. And he was able to make out the pattern of a metal ship, a massive ship, with deck joists and deck supports and all sorts of things you'd expect in a large vessel. And that was because the metal rivets which he found all were identified by the subsurface radar. That was discovered in 1991. the metal detectors picked up the rivets in the structures, and Ron White discovered a lot of fossilized rivets. There are a whole lot of fossilized rivets, and the radar scans showed a large vessel. I told you the dimensions, and it showed really how it had been made with all the various different deck timbers. Now, the radar helped Ron White to localize this particular deck timber, which was displayed on CNN television in 1991. It's a petrified beam from Noah's Ark. Now, I want you to look very carefully at that beam because it's actually laminated. In other words, it's 3 different types of wood glued together. And I want you to look very carefully at that because one thing you'll notice is that there are no annular rings in that wood. No annular rings at all. The wood that you and I are familiar with has got rings in it because of the seasonal variation in temperature and humidity. Well, this is pre-flood wood, and of course before the flood there was no rain, and what's more, the temperature was constant because of the water canopy. So there were no annular rings, so that's pre-flood wood. This radar shows a loose deck timber near the surface, and there's a certificate of analysis of that wood I showed you, and it's actually got some carbon in it, nearly 5% carbon. There's a large thumb bone found near Noah's Ark, showing that humans were actually much taller than they are now. A large thumb bone. And there's a very large human jaw, also found near Dubazet, near Noah's Ark. So the Turkish government officially recognized this as the site of Noah's Ark. And in 1989, they built a visitors center there. And this is Bill Fry, with local government officials at the centre, and daily tours from the nearby town visit Noah's Ark, and this is a Turkish travel agency, and as I showed to you before, road signs point the way. Nahungamisi means Noah's ship, and this is a tourist brochure from Dubazet. There we are, there's Dubazet, and the local tourist brochure shows you how you can go and visit Noah's ship. So there's Ron White on CNN television, and there he is constructing a model of Noah's Ark, which is a very, very stable vessel. And so it's actually official as far as the Turkish government are concerned. These are actually the remains of Noah's Ark, which proves the authenticity of the Bible. Just before we leave Noah, I want to tell you something really extraordinary, is that the Christian Gospel in Genesis chapter 5 from Noah's ancestors. I want you to look from top to bottom the names in Hebrew of Adam's ancestors as recorded in Genesis chapter 5. So they're Adam, Seth, Enosh, I'm reading on the left-hand list here, Canaan, Mahalalel, means the blessed God, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, that means his death shall bring, because when Methuselah died, that's when the flood came. Lamech and Noah. And now I want you to read on the right hand the actual English meanings of those Hebrew words and see what it's actually saying. And this is what it says. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort. I hope you can see that that is actually the Christian gospel in the names of Noah's ancestors. So there's that book I mentioned, and again, the government of Turkey have confirmed that this is Noah's site. This is really, really interesting stuff. And now we're going to move on to Sodom and Gomorrah, where I've been many times. The Bible tells us how God destroyed the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and brimstone. And it says in Genesis, the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire. And it says in 2 Peter 2, turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes. Now it's just below Masada on the shores of the Dead Sea. There are the twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And you can walk along those cities. That's an aerial photograph of the twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And as you drive along the Dead Sea, you see these unusual white formations, strange geometric structures, which they're eroded